It was pretty strong.
So then hopefully it will be now too.
Let's see. Oh, 5 people already waiting. Look at that. Hello, everyone. It's like, I wish I could do the Kermit the Frog voice. Hello, everyone. There we go. Very nice. With my creepy online friend here. All right. Well, there's 8 people on already. She muted herself because she's got her son.
Awesome. There we go.
There we go. We got 2 minutes. We just want to get on so people can start typing in their kid questions. If you have kids around you or if kids told you, we got a few from email too. But start typing your questions now so we get a little lead time, and my producer over here, Tina, has time to read them. Hi, Father Ted and Tina. Hello, Stavro B1. Oh, it's Lisa. Hi, Lisa. Kosiaftis.
Oh, hi, Lisa.
That's a good one. Why do I color eggs red on Easter? Yeah, that's a good one. Because red is so much better than blue. I'm just joking. We'll answer that too. Keep sending in the questions now, and then we'll start in about a minute and a half. We just finished. We had liturgy in the morning too. Oh, Tina mutes herself sometimes because she's got her son, Khadi, sitting next to her. So, yeah. That's all live. So it's almost 1 o'clock. Oh, we'll see how we go this week. For those of you who don't know, always, during Holy Week, it's always tough for priests physically because it's exhausting because there's so many services, and also it's very tiring on the throat because there's a lot of chanting, and it's going to be worse this week because we don't have anybody here except one chanter, which means that the priests have to help supplement. In a lot of churches, there's maybe bigger churches, there's 2 or 3 chanters, and they share the load because there's a lot of chanting, a lot of hours of chanting. And so now it's just basically the priest and the chanter working in tandem. So that's going to make our throats hurt a little more because I know that during Holy Week, by the end, I almost lose my voice every year just because there's so much chanting. So we'll see how we go this year. I'm trying to drink a lot of hot tea and keep the vocal cords going. Oh, Vicky's on there. Good. 17 people. Very nice. All right. It's 1 o'clock.
All right. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone.
All right. So welcome to our Father Ted Talks live kids edition.
Yes.
I would like for everyone, in addition to their regular prayers, to pray for me as I try and do this with my very active 4-year-old. But this is not much different than Sundays at church, right, Father?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Trying to control a 4-year-old in church or trying to control a 4-year-old here while we chat live, not much different.
All right. We got a few.
So I'm going to be here muted for a little while because I've got a little active child here. Maybe you want to handle the first couple questions, Father?
Sure, why not? I'll do you the favor. What am I paying you for? Okay.
Right.
So I'll start. There's a few online, but I'm going to start with 2 quick questions that came via our email, our Fr.TEDTalks@gmail.com. This is from a mother of 2 daughters. One is 12 years old and one is 8 years old. The 12-year-old asked the question that she is in middle school at a Christian school. But even though she's at a Christian school, a lot of her friends don't believe in Christ and think religion is boring, and that she's worried that this will influence her. What should she do? That's a good question. It's kind of ironic that our kids can attend Christian schools and they can be full of atheists. So that's kind of funny. The times have definitely changed, but obviously peer pressure can be extremely difficult to deal with. And we know this, that it's not popular to be a Christian, at least a devout one these days. And you know what? In the history of the church, it has never been popular to be a Christian. So, but especially in our time now. So, what would I recommend? Well, it's going to be tough. I'm not going to lie to you. And you are 12, so you're in middle school now. You're still going to have high school. But I would say that this is always an opportunity because I found when I was going through high school that I always had to try to find a balance between, my life with my friends. I played football a lot, things like that. So I was on the youth boards and things like that in the churches and in the schools, and I found that it was a delicate balance between my faith and also my social life. And a lot of people would ask me because I wouldn't do the things that the average guy, for example, who was in high school and played football would do. I wouldn't really be going out and partying every weekend and getting drunk and things like that. I didn't date as much, things like that. So a lot of people would ask me. So I used it as an opportunity to kind of discuss, and I wouldn't be preachy about it, and I wouldn't try to convert people and things like that. But I would be confident in my faith, and people sometimes they would find that interesting, like how can this person be confident and yet not over preachy? And it was an opportunity to explain, that what it is to be an Orthodox Christian. It's very different than what they consider to be Christian. Most people, they react to a type of Christianity that they see on TV. And what do they see on TV? They usually see either Catholicism, Roman Catholicism, or they see evangelical Protestant Christianity, right? Especially like mega churches, things like that on TV. So most people, when they think of Christian, that's what pops in their heads. And we are neither of those things. So use it as an opportunity to talk about, what you believe, how the Orthodox Church is different. It will challenge you to learn more about your own faith because you'll have to be able to respond to questions. And also the other thing that's really, really important is to be very, very close to your local church, and especially to have other Orthodox friends. If they're not in your school, try to get connected to an Orthodox youth group or some other type of Orthodox program, summer camps, things like that, where you have a good support system of Orthodox kids your age who can help you. I know that for me, I was in my youth group at St. Nicholas growing up in Scarborough. I was in the dance groups, and all those people kind of understood me. They were all the same faith. And so even though people at school didn't understand me that much, when it came to religion, I still had on the weekends or during the week, I would have my other extracurricular activities with Orthodox people, Greek Orthodox people, and that was a good anchor for me. So that's what I would recommend for you. As far as the second question, which was from her second daughter, who is 8 years old, she, I believe, was asking that she said she had a lot of bad dreams, and she wakes up at night a lot and then can't get back to sleep. And then are there any specific prayers to read for that? Well, when I was a little kid, I used to have bad dreams. But I haven't had a bad dream, believe it or not, since I was 14 years old, which is awesome. Yeah, I sleep like a baby. And the reason why, what I believe, why I don't have bad dreams is two reasons. Well, two things that I do. One of them was I have an aunt who's a nun in Corinth, in Greece. And she told me that, before you go to bed every night, do your cross over your pillow. After you do your nighttime prayers, do a cross over your pillow 3 times before you go to bed. So I started doing that. And as soon as I started doing that, I didn't have bad dreams anymore. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily going to work for everybody, because I know people who pray and they still have bad dreams. Okay, sometimes we have bad dreams. But I started doing that. And also, another thing that really helps me out is the Jesus prayer. And the Jesus prayer is the prayer that we read with the koboskini, with the prayer rope that we have, the little knots that we have. Sometimes we have it in bracelets, or we have a little bigger one, the koboskini. And we read the prayer, or we recite the prayer over and over again. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And we read that, we say that over and over again. I find that saying that prayer as I'm falling asleep, if I'm having a difficult day or if I'm having a stressful day, if that's like the last thing in my mind when I go to bed, I find that I have very peaceful sleep. And even if I do wake up, or if somebody wakes up and they've had a bad dream, I would say to say the Jesus prayer again: Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Just say that over and over again until you fall back asleep, and you'll be able to sleep again. That's what I would recommend.
Well, and even as an adult, I find that helpful in moments of anxiety or moments of fear. The Jesus prayer really just helps to calm you down, and to bring you back down a little bit.
Yep.
Okay, so we have a practical Easter question, and the question is, why do we color our eggs red at Easter time?
Okay, so there's two reasons for it. One is the color symbolically represents blood, and of course, blood reminds us of the crucifixion and the passion, and so this is why we color eggs. That's the particular color that is used. There is a beautiful, There's a beautiful tradition from the life of Saint Mary Magdalene. There is, if you look up her life on the internet, she's called equal to the apostles. She was a preacher, and after the resurrection of Christ, she also went around in much of the Roman world and preached the gospel. And as the story goes, she was brought in front of one of the Roman emperors. I forget which one it was at this moment. It might be Trajan, but I have to double check. But you can look it up. And she was brought before the emperor, and she spoke about Christ, and he wouldn't believe her. And I think, as the story goes, and I could be 100%, like I might not be 100% accurate, but I'm paraphrasing, is that he said, well, if what you say is true and the resurrection exists, then you show me a sign. And apparently she took an egg and she held it up to him, and the egg turned red in front of him miraculously. And so this is one of the kind of the traditions that we have, that we paint the eggs red. But there are a lot of different traditions why we paint eggs red, but those are the two main reasons, because red represents the passion of Christ, and also the miracle of St. Mary Magdalene in front of the Roman emperor, where the egg turned red miraculously to prove that the resurrection truly exists.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Another question, this one is sort of more personal. Why did you become a priest?
Okay. I've never heard this before. Well, it's not a long story, and it's not but it's not simple either. It's not like I woke up one day and had an epiphany, like, I decided now I'm going to become a priest. I was always involved in the church. The short answer is, and because I was involved, I loved it quite a bit, especially after the age of 11. I started being an altar boy and serving a lot in the altar, and I fell in love with the liturgy. And so the more I grew into my teens, the more I participated in more services, and I found that I really enjoyed them. And because I was participating in the services a lot, I also got to observe the priest and also the ministry of the church. And it's just something that I really love. So by the time I got to the end of high school, I was seriously contemplating serving in the church, because it was just kind of the natural calling that I had, like the natural pull that I had towards that. And so, I would say, like in grade 12, before I graduated, I decided to go to seminary. And when I made the decision, it was a very natural decision. It was kind of like, just, I'm born and this is what I am. And it's more like a realization of something that you already are, as opposed to something that you want to suddenly go do at this moment. And so I made the decision right out of high school. And when I graduated, I went to seminary right away, and I never looked back since. So it was something very normal to me, and something that continues to be normal, albeit difficult. And I can't really see myself doing anything else. So that's kind of like the short version of the story.
So, and sort of on that note, we have a question about how little boys can become altar boys, and what is it exactly that they do?
Okay. Sorry, I'm just we're getting some on email as well, but yeah. So how do boys? So becoming an altar boy, well, it's not like there's no like massive process. You would just, if you want to become an altar boy, you would talk to your local priest, your parish, and ask him if you can, or get your parents to ask him if he needs a helper in the altar, and the priest will give you the blessing to go into the altar, and the other altar boys will teach you. And the altar boys, or the altar servers as they're called, have a very important role. They do a myriad of different things inside the altar during liturgy because the priest needs help. So everything from lighting the charcoal for the censer that has the incense and giving the censer to the priest at different times. When we do processions around the church, altar boys carry the cross or the fans, the excepteria, the round things that have the angels on them, or candles. They hold candles for the gospel reading because we usually light candles when we hear the word of God. Altar boys help with bringing the zeon, which is the boiling hot water that we use to pour into the blood, the wine that becomes the blood of Christ during the service. There's a lot of different things that the altar boys do in the altar to help out the priest to make sure that the service runs smoothly and beautifully and there are no problems, right? And so that's really the majority of the things they do. They cut the didoro, they prepare the bread that needs to go out for the people. They help the priest when he gives communion by holding the cloth, the red cloth underneath people's chins so the communion doesn't fall anywhere on the floor, things like that. So there's a lot of different things that the altar boys do, and they get trained by other altar boys. Yeah. You're muted.
There we go. Okay, so in our chat the other day, you talked a little bit about how holy light that we receive on the night of the Anastasy, it doesn't necessarily come from Jerusalem. It doesn't come from there all the time. But the question is about where does the holy light come from? So do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so the holy light, so when we say the light, the tradition of lighting the light on Pascha night is not it's not from Jerusalem. So people think that when we say the holy light, it means that it's coming from the miracle that happens at the holy tomb of Jesus every Holy Saturday in Jerusalem. You can see that online or on TV every year when it happens. That's not where the tradition comes from, because the tradition of lighting the light at night at the resurrection it predates the miracle that started happening in Jerusalem, right? So the light basically represents the light coming out of the tomb, that Christ. The Christ resurrection. So we light that from the little oil lamp that is always on the altar. We have a little eternal flame that always stays on the altar and should be always lit, and the priest lights it from there. Here in North America, especially, it's never the light from Jerusalem because it's impossible to get the flight to get the light to fly over to North America and to get all to all the churches in time, right? So it's just impossible to do that. So the light is symbolic of the resurrection itself, not necessarily from the tomb of Jesus, right? That's why we use the light, and that's why you can even chant "Christ is risen, Christos Anesti" at home this year. It's not the same, it's not as good, it's not perfect, but you can light your own kadilaki and light your labades and light your children's labades, and you can do that. So, yeah.
Okay. The next question we had has to do with angels and saints. So the question is, if you could talk about how does the question was become an angel or a saint, or what is their role?
Well, nobody becomes okay, so let's separate between what is a saint and what is an angel, right? So an angel is not a human being, and human beings do not become angels. So I've heard this before sometimes, people say, oh, when I die, I'll become an angel. No. We don't become angels. Angels are a different creation of God. They are the bodiless powers. They have no bodies. They have no physical, flesh and bones, and like we do. They are spirits, and they are created by God as messengers. Angelos or evangelos means a messenger of God, and that's the purpose of the angel is to convey messages from God to human beings, right? This is one of the reasons why angels exist. But they are a different creation. They are not human beings, nor do human beings become angels. Saints are just basically, when we say saints, the Greek word is aios, and aios means holy, and we use that term and we refer it to God. We call God holy, and when we attribute that term to human beings, it doesn't mean that human beings become God, but rather that people who live a Christ-centered life, they live a life that is very much in line with what Christ taught us to live, to be good and to be loving and to be kind and to be forgiving and to self-sacrifice for other human beings. Then when we do those things, we become like God. We exhibit the attributes of God. And some people, they're just really good at that. So they are our examples. They are our heroes, and we call them saints. They're just really good examples of how to live a really good life. They're not perfect. They make mistakes as well, but they are basically like the champions, the ones we look up to, the role models, those people that we would say are really good examples of what we're trying to be. That's what a saint is.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. The next question we had, which
That's a good question. Why can't girls be altar? Well,
or I guess in general, the question is they don't have a role in the altar at all.
well, theoretically they could. So in the history of the church, there were instances where girls were used as altar servers. The reason why, okay, so it's a very complex question, but the main reason why is that especially in the ancient times, there in churches, for example, there was always a separation between men and women in prayer. So, in the old Greek churches, you would go in and the women would sit on one side and the men would sit on the other side. And the reason why they would do this is that so that the men and the women would not be distracted during the divine liturgy and they could pray as opposed to looking to each other. Because, like when people get older, men and women get attracted to each other, okay? And so this is not something that we want happening within the prayer services, right? And so especially when it comes to the altar, because we have an all-male priesthood, when they had in the early church some young girls who were serving, but eventually as those young girls got older, they did not want to have any type of inappropriate, not relationships per se, but any kind of scandal for the people, of young women and male priests serving the altar together. And so that was kind of put away, and they reserved the altar serving only for males, right? In order to kind of avoid any type of scandal or to avoid any type of distractions during the divine liturgy. That's just like human nature. It's not really a theological reason. It's more just a practical reason why that was done. Because when we see in monasteries, for example, like, we have female monasteries with nuns, the nuns serve in the altar when there's a priest, right? Because there are no other males there. So, technically a female can go in the altar. It's just they have to have and nobody should be going in the altar without a blessing to do so. So it's a myth that only men can just go in the altar whenever they want and women cannot. No, nobody should ever go in the altar unless there is a reason for it. And so in the church, even today, we have neokoro, the sacristan, the person who works in who cleans the altar and takes care of the altar, and we have neokorisa, female sacristan, and there can be older ladies who have gotten a blessing from a bishop to enter into the altar and to clean. We had one here for many years, neokorisa, who has a blessing from the bishop, and she would enter the altar and clean and prepare and do a lot of things. So there's lots of churches, even in Greece, in villages, where the server is an elderly lady, right? So this is the practicality of not having younger women was the issue, because they didn't want to have any kind of scandal between young priests serving and young women in the altar, right? So that was really the main reason, not because women are not allowed in the altar. So.
Right, and as you explained it to me another time that I asked you this question, it's almost like a protection of them, to protect them from that kind of scandal.
Correct. Yeah, because nothing has to be happening for people to create rumors, right?
Of course. Okay, we have a number of other different questions, and if you see me kind of looking down, it's because I'm getting questions via Facebook, questions.
I got one too.
Text. Via email. For those of you who are just joining us now, you can also email your question if you prefer for it to be anonymous. There's my peekaboo at Fr.TEDTalks@gmail.com. So you can always email your question there or send them to us privately if you so choose. The next question was a really interesting one, and I think a lot of kids probably have this question, is why do so many people choose to be bad instead of loving God?
Oh, that's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know if people who are bad sometimes don't love God. I just think that sometimes we as people make mistakes. Like, think about it this way for the kids who are listening right now, right? You all love your parents, right? We all love our parents. Well, you hope you do, right? But a lot of times we don't listen to our parents. Sometimes we want to do what we want to do, and we don't want to listen, or maybe we think that our parents, when they tell us to do something, it's not going to be fun for us. And whatever the reason, sometimes we don't listen and we do something bad, and then we get in trouble sometimes, or our parents get upset. It doesn't mean we don't love them. It just means that sometimes we have an ego, we have pride, we want to do our own thing. We think we know better than our parents, and we want to do our own thing. And sometimes our own thing is the right thing to do, but a lot of times it's not the right thing to do, because usually older people, like our parents, they know more than us because they've lived more years and they have more wisdom and more experience. And when they try to give us advice or tell us to do things for our own good, it's because they've lived longer and they know that what they're telling us to do is right. And we're younger, and sometimes we don't understand, and we don't realize that the thing that we're about to do might be bad for us. God is very much the same way. He loves us, and we try to love him. Sometimes we don't do what he wants us to do because we think we know better. But as long as we say sorry, it's called repentance. We repent. We ask forgiveness from God, and then he'll forgive us. So it's not like people don't love God. It's just, I think a lot of people, they forget that they should listen to God, or they want to listen to themselves first. And so when we go to church and we pray, we practice listening to God more than listening to ourselves, and that's the most important thing.
I think that bears repeating, honestly, is that it doesn't mean that you don't love God when you're bad, or that God doesn't love you. It's that sort of struggle that you were talking about. I think that's really important for our kids to remember as well.
Yeah.
Okay, a couple more questions, and I love the questions that are coming in from the kids.
Tina, sorry. I got a quick one that I want to read that somebody sent to my personal email. It's just a fast one. It says, as Christians, should we call the holiday Pascha or Easter? I heard Easter is a pagan word and celebration. Yeah, so it's a good question. So technically, we should be using the word Pascha. Pascha means Passover, and basically it is the correct word that we use to describe Easter. Now, in English, we say Easter because everybody knows Easter and they know what it means. But the word Easter comes from the pagan celebration of like the spring and the renewal of nature, just the actual physical word that we use, the linguistic word. And that's why some people don't like it. But we as Christians living in Canada, like, we know that Easter means Pascha. So if somebody uses the word Easter, it doesn't mean like they're bad or anything, or they're doing something wrong. We know what they're referring to. But we should try to get into the habit of using the proper terminology. If you guys remember the last show we did, the last Father TED Talk Live, people were calling liturgy Mass. And I said, it's not evil to say Mass. It's just not appropriate because Mass is what the Roman Catholics call liturgy. But for Orthodox, we call it the divine liturgy. So it's just more appropriate to use the proper term within our holy tradition, our Christian tradition, which is the liturgy. Just like that, for us, Easter is Pascha, right? The Passover. We are passing over from death to life. That's what Passover means, Pascha. And this is why the term is much more appropriate, because it explains what's going on, right? Where Christ is crucified and then he resurrects, right? And we are all passing from death to life.
Awesome. Something else that we kind of touched on in the last chat, but I think our kids would really like to know, is the question that came through is, where will we get the Holy Light this year? So Father Ted explained in the last chat,
and this is a very
special scenario this year. So you want to go ahead and explain that?
Yeah, okay. So for the third time,
Yeah.
It's okay, guys. Yeah, it's a big question. When we do Pascha this year, we're going to do it in our homes so we can be safe, so we don't get anybody sick. And we're going to have our labades, and we're going to light our kadili, our little oil lamp at home in front of our icons with our family. And if we can watch the resurrection service at night, and for those of you who can actually stay up that late, you can watch it on YouTube. And when the priest comes out and says Christos Anesti, and also Defte Lavete Phos, which is Come Receive the Light, which is the first hymn that we chant before Christ is risen. When the light comes out of the altar, then you will light your kadili, you will light your labades from your kadili, which represents the same light, and you can sing Christos Anesti. And as we said the last two times as well, we started a group on Facebook called Pascha at Home 2020, and I would highly recommend that if families can, they can videotape their Christos Anesti at midnight on Saturday night, and they can upload that so they can share it with everybody, so we can all see, everybody's Pascha in their homes. So that's it. We're going to light it from our kadili this year.
Yeah, and you had posted previously resources. So if you don't have the Holy Week book explaining the services, it's all available online.
Yeah.
Highly recommend you download it. I always find it easier to download the copy that has English and Greek, because as your priest flips back and forth between English and Greek, it's easier to follow and follow along. I know that the service is much more understandable, and it goes by a lot nicer for me if I'm reading along. So, make that, especially with some of your older kids, you can include that as part of it.
Mm-hmm.
A question that came through was, how long should kids, so small kids, I guess, fast before they can take communion? What is a reasonable amount of time for kids to be fasting?
Well, listen, the question of fasting is usually twofold. It's when do they start, at what age, and then also how long, right? So the length is not as important as the age, right? So kids will get into a pattern very easily as they grow up, right? So yes, little ones require more food and they require more sustenance, and it's a little difficult for little ones to start fasting. But when they start getting a little older, like when they start getting into I would say 7, 8, 9 years old, that you can start incorporating basic fasting rules, right? So for example, like my twins, they're 8 years old now. They just turned 8 in January. And my daughter was like, I think, Daddy, I can do no meat for the 40 days. I can, there's lots of other things to eat. There's cheese and milk and other things. I think I can do that. And you know what? The kids can do that, and not have any problems with their development or their growth. You can give them a lot of protein in other ways. Or you can change, you can limit some of the protein, because obviously when kids are growing, you want them to get their nutrients and you want them to be able to grow properly. But at the same time, there's lots of different alternatives now. So I think as they start getting into 7, 8, 9 years old, you can start incorporating some aspects of the fasting. And as they get a little older, you can start incorporating more of the fasting. There are different approaches and different parents will do it in different ways. But this is the approach that I find is most useful. And kids will be able to do it. Will be able to do it for 40 days because kids will usually, eat whatever you put in front of them. And if they don't, well, you can be more creative with it. But you're the one controlling the meals in the home, right? So in the end, it's not the kids who are cooking, but the parents who are cooking for them. So if the parents set the tone and the parents are also fasting, then they can set a good example for the children, and the kids can do the whole full fast, the 40 days. It's not something that only has to be 1 week. Nothing bad will happen to them. They will not get sick.
Yeah, and there's a lot of really great recipes out there, a lot of great resources for things that you can even bake to have on hand, granola bars and things like that maybe they'll like, that'll make it a little bit easier. So perhaps that would be helpful. Yeah,
and also let's not forget, there's also this kind of myth out there, nutrition-wise, that all protein has to come from meat. That's not true. Yes, we do need protein, like we need a lot of other things, but there's a lot of protein in a lot of other foods, especially vegetables. Like for example, broccoli has a ton of protein in it, and people don't realize that. They think that all their protein has to come from beef or chicken or something like that, right? or fish. So there are a lot of other options, and let's not forget that for the majority of the history of the church, people did not live like we live. They did not have access to meat. So when we say fasting and we say the full Orthodox fast is vegan, which is no meat, no dairy, we find that extremely difficult today because we've been spoiled into having, fast food and delivery and supermarkets, and we have access to meat every single day. This was not the case for the majority of human existence, right? Of the history of mankind. In most of the church history, people lived agrarian, rural culture where they were mostly farmers, and they didn't have access to meat. They mostly ate a vegetarian, diet. The only time that they would have meat was on big feast days where they had to slaughter one of their animals. They had to kill a pig or a cow, and then they would have meat. And then once that meat was gone, they wouldn't have meat for how many months more. So they were already eating vegetarian. So to cut out meat was not a big issue for them because they didn't have meat. And cutting out the milk, that was a little harder, but it was easier for them to fast than it is for us today. Today, we're so used to having meat all the time, which is not good for our bodies anyways, that we haven't trained ourselves to be a little more vegetarian. Not completely, but I mean more plant-based. But that's what they were doing for so many years, and for thousands of years. And so we have to remember that people were healthy, they were fine, they were strong, and they didn't have access to the amount of meat that we have today. So
right. So a follow-up question to that from Gia. is, why do we fast for 40 days? What's the significance of that?
Oh yeah, so it's kind of interesting. So there's two kind of answers to that. One historical and one symbolic. So I'll give you the symbolic first. 40 is a big number in the Bible. Anytime you find the number 40, it's usually associated with some type of purification or some type of no, let's cancel that. There we go. It's usually has to do with some type of purification, some type of process of moving towards God and purifying oneself. So when you see, like in the Old Testament, for example, Moses, when he went up to Mount Sinai to get the 10 Commandments, he was on the mountain for 40 days praying before God gave him the law, and then he brought it down in the tablets to the people. When the Israelites they sinned and they worshipped the idol, the golden calf, while Moses was up on Mount Sinai, which was really bad because they created a fake god and they sacrificed to it and they killed people. God, in order to purify them, he made them wander in the desert for 40 years until that whole generation who had sinned and who had become idolaters, until they all got old and they died. And then their children grew up, and then there was a new generation. So it took 40 years to cleanse the whole people of Israel of that sin, so that the new people could enter into the promised land clean and without that sin hanging over their heads. So that was, again, 40 years. In the New Testament, you see that Christ, after his baptism in the Jordan River by John the Baptist, he goes out into the wilderness for 40 days and he fasts. He doesn't eat anything, he doesn't drink anything, and he prays and he gets tempted by the devil. So he goes through this period of really focusing on his spiritual life and his prayer, and not focusing on food and the needs of his body, so that he can really become focused and overcome any kind of spiritual temptation. After Jesus resurrects, he is seen on earth by different people for 40 days until the ascension, which is 40 days after Pascha, where we celebrate, where he goes up to heaven for the last time. So 40 is always this kind of like reoccurring number. And so we have the same type of thing. We have 40 days of fasting leading up to Holy Week, where we purify ourselves. We focus again on our spirituality. We try to not eat so much. We try to remember the poor. So we try to eat less food and then spend that money or give that food away to people who are poor and suffering. And we try to focus more on our own spirituality and controlling our bodies and controlling our stomachs. That's the spiritual side of it. Practically speaking, in the early church, like very, very early in the first couple of 100 years, Pascha was celebrated by the believers, those who were already baptized. The 40-day fast had not been created yet. It had not been instituted yet. And Christian believers would fast for 3 days before Pascha, and that was it. But what happened was the catechumens are the people who are studying to become Christian, to be baptized at Pascha, they would fast for 40 days as a preparation for their baptism. And as the years went on, the church saw in its wisdom that this fast of the catechumens, of the people who were not Christians yet, but they were getting ready to become Christian, this fast was so beneficial for them that it would also be beneficial for the already baptized Christians who maybe didn't know enough about their faith or kind of were like getting a little lazy in their faith. It was a good time to kind of buckle down and refocus. And so slowly the church adopted this fast of the catechumens and applied it to the whole church, so that all of us kind of become catechumens again every year and kind of renew our faith and renew our dedication to learning more about our faith and prepping ourselves for Holy Pascha. So these are the reasons why we use the 40, and I think it's a really good thing that we do every year, kind of like almost like a spiritual boot camp that we come back to every year.
Well, and Gia's on a roll with another question, a follow-up, which is...
And Gia's 8 years old.
Gia is 8 years old, yeah. And
Which
she's
is
asking
awesome.
questions we all actually probably want to know. And the question is, why do we fast from those specific foods? What is it about those foods that why we should not be eating them?
Well, so it's not anything specifically about those foods. The foods are not bad. No foods are bad. Everything is made by God. Everything is blessed. So it's not that the foods are evil or bad for us. It's just the church, you know how we have like food groups, like, you know, even like when we talk about food groups like meats and dairy and vegetables and grains, like we have different food groups, and different kinds of foods give us different type of energy. So when we start to cut out groups of food, it makes our fast more difficult. It helps us to kind of like, you know, minimize the amount of food that we're eating, and not eating a lot of heavy and rich foods, like things that make us feel lazy or lethargic or too over full and things like that, so that we can focus and we can be alert, we can feel light, and we can feel that we can function and our minds are clear. So when we say we're not going to eat meat or meats, that's all the meats. Like, it doesn't matter whether it's beef or chicken or fish. We kind of we put those aside. Well, that limits a bunch of foods that we can eat or make. And then when we say we're not going to have dairy, well, that limits like milk and cheese, all butter and all these things. So you're limiting the things that you can eat, and it makes your meals more simple and also cheaper. You're not spending a lot of money on them, so you can spend more money on the poor. You can give away more to those people who are in need. So all these reasons, well, that's why we start to cut out these types of foods, not because they're evil or bad, but because they just kind of simplify our diet and make us feel a little more lighter and focus more on our prayer. Have you ever had a really, really big meal, you go eat like a really big hamburger or a big steak or something, and then you sit down on the couch and you're like, oh, I'm so full. Like you're gonna do after Pascha meal or after like Thanksgiving, and you eat too much, and then you feel sick, or you feel like your belly is like so full, and you want to fall asleep. That's called being lethargic. And you just can't focus on anything. You don't want to do anything. You just want to go pass out, right? Well, that's not good when you want to pray, right? And so you don't want to eat like that when you want to pray. So the lighter you feel, the less food you have in your stomach, the more alert you are, and the easier it is to focus on the spiritual life.
I don't know about you, Father, but I've never eaten like that ever before in my life.
Right.
Okay, awesome questions. Thank you so much. And we still have lots more coming in. So one question we have is, why do some Orthodox Christians celebrate Christmas on a different day than us? What is the difference, and which one is right?
Well, that's a big question. Okay, so both are right. So what do I mean by that? So this is I'll try to make it a quick answer because it's a long issue. It's a big issue. Yeah. So it all has to do with different types of calendars that we use. So different cultures and different places in the world follow different calendars. Today, most people follow the same calendar. We all follow, 7 days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And most people in the world follow what is called the Gregorian calendar, which was made by Pope Gregory, who was Pope of Rome at the time. And there's other people, like, for example, how people say, they say Happy Chinese New Year because the Chinese follow a different type of calendar, right? And the Jewish people follow a different type of calendar. So everybody has different cultures and different religions have different types of calendars. It's not always the same everywhere. So in the ancient world, people followed what was called the Julian calendar. And the Julian calendar was made by Julius Caesar. And the church, especially in the Roman times when it first started, just followed the same calendar as everybody else. So all the feast days and everything followed the Julian calendar. But as time went on and as years went by, the calendar was refined, and Pope Gregory later on created what was called the Gregorian calendar, which was more scientifically accurate because the old Julian calendar had some mistakes in it, and it had some mistakes with the astronomy, with the rotation of the planets around the sun, all this kind of stuff. And anyways, I'm not going to get into all the details because I know everyone's like young here, but there was an upgrade in the calendar. So that's why the Gregorian calendar is kind of like an upgraded version. It's like the calendar 2.0. And the Orthodox churches, at that time did not kind of switch over to the Gregorian. They just kept using the old Julian calendar. And then in 1922, so almost 100 years ago, 98 years ago, some Orthodox churches, like the Greek Orthodox Church, the Antiochian Orthodox Church, which is the Arabic-speaking one, I think the Romanians, there's a few, Bulgarian church, I think, some of the Orthodox churches decided that they wanted to switch over to the new calendar because it is more scientifically accurate. There's a lot of controversy over this. Some people didn't like it, and some Orthodox churches didn't like to do it. So some Orthodox churches stayed on the old Julian calendar, like the Russians, the Serbians, Ukrainians, and a few others. And then some Orthodox churches switched over to the new calendar. But in the end, and because there's differences in days, there's like a 13-day difference. That's why the old Julian calendar, they celebrate 13 days after us for Christmas, and we celebrate on December 25th, and they celebrate for them it's December 25th, but for us it's January 7th. So it's really confusing, but all you have to really remember is that it doesn't matter which calendar you use, it's the feast days that are important. So the feast of Christmas, birthday of Jesus, being born to the world, Pascha, all this stuff. All these feasts, the spiritual meaning of them, that's what's important. That we set aside days in our year to celebrate and to commemorate these really important events that happen in the Bible. That's what's important. So whether you're celebrating on the Julian calendar or the revised or revised Gregorian calendar, doesn't make a difference. As long as you're celebrating the actual feast, that's the most important thing. And that's why in the Orthodox world, the Russian Orthodox Church, for example, can celebrate Christmas on one day, we can celebrate on a different day, but we're in communion with each other and we love each other and we're all the same faith and we believe the exact same thing.
Amazing. Okay. I have a question from Alexandra, who's 7 years old. Hi, Father Ted. I have a prayer book and it has so many prayers. Which prayer do I read? Because the book is so long and I can't read the whole book each day.
Okay, well, Alexandra, that's a good question. So you don't have to read the whole prayer book each day. The prayer book there is not to be read every day, the whole thing. The prayer book has different types of prayers for different times of the day and for different occasions. So the reason why it's so big and it has so many is because it gives you a lot of different tools. So think of it as a tool belt, like somebody who's a construction worker and they have a tool belt and they have different types of tools. You got a hammer, you got a screwdriver, and you got a saw, and you got all these different types of tools, right? And different jobs require different tools. If you want to hammer a nail, you got to get a hammer. If you want to screw something, you need a screwdriver, right? If you want to cut something, you need a saw. So every situation is different. So in different times in our lives and different times of the day, we have different types of prayers. So for example, when we wake up in the morning, there are morning prayers that talk about getting up in the morning and praising God and getting ready for our day. When we in the end of the day, we have evening prayers, or when we want to eat a meal, there is a breakfast prayer, or there's a lunch prayer, or there's a dinner prayer to pray over our food. So if you pay attention in your Orthodox prayer book, you'll see that there's little titles on the prayers that you'll see: morning prayers, or prayers before meals, or prayers before you take Holy Communion on Sunday. So depending on when you want to pray, just pick the prayer that is for that time or for that situation. If you want to go to church on Sunday and take communion, then maybe the night before, it's nice to open up your little prayer book and find the pre-communion prayers that are for preparation for communion and read those prayers. If you want to have a meal, then go to your meal, prayer before meal, and read that prayer. If you're waking up in the morning, just read the morning prayers. Don't read the other prayers. So it's basically, you just find the prayer that works for you at the time that you need it. That's why there's so many different prayers. You don't have to read them all on the same day.
Okay. Now, question from Padeli. Why does the cross come out on Holy Thursday and not Good Friday?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. So it's kind of interesting. So in the Orthodox Church, we have like morning prayers, which are called matins or orthros, and then we have vespers, esperino, which is the evening prayers. If you pay attention to the Holy Week books that you have, there's something strange happening in Holy Week that people don't pay attention to. All the days are shifted back half a day. So, for example, tomorrow we have Palm Sunday in the morning. We have Divine Liturgy, Orthros and Divine Liturgy. In the evening, we have the first bridegroom service. That bridegroom service is not a Vespers. It's not an evening service. It's the Orthros of Monday morning. But we're doing it on Sunday night, the night before. That's weird. Why do we do that? That doesn't make any sense. We should be doing it the Orthros of Monday morning. Why are we pulling it back and doing it the night before on Sunday night? The reason being is because at some point in the history of the church noticed that in the Orthros services of Holy Week, that's where all the beautiful hymnology and the beautiful hymns are, and all the theology is in those services. And those were traditionally done in the morning. Orthros is done in the morning. But the problem is that everybody's working in the morning. And everybody's going to work. And even in the old days, people were going to the farms. They were planting their crops. They were doing all these things. And so they were missing these services. They couldn't do the services, and they were missing all the beautiful hymns, right? So at one point, the church, practically speaking, said, okay, for Holy Week, we're going to make an exception, and we're going to shift everything backwards half a day. So we're going to do the Monday morning Orthros. We're going to do it on Sunday night. And then Tuesday morning Orthros will be on Monday night, and so on, so that people can attend these beautiful Orthros services and listen to these beautiful hymns. So a long time ago, the bridegroom service, which we all know to be an evening service, used to be a morning service. It used to be it's an Orthros service. Even if you open your book, it says Orthros, matins. And it usually says in brackets in your little Holy Week book, it says It is the Monday Orthros as sung on Sunday night. So it's half a day back. So to your question about Holy Thursday, yeah, why are we reading the crucifixion narrative, the 12 Gospels, on Thursday night when we know that the crucifixion happened on a Friday? Well, it is. It's the Friday Matins, it's the Friday Orthros, the 12 Gospels, that used to be done in the old days on Friday morning, and they've been shifted back to Thursday night so that people can attend the service. And that's why it confuses people sometimes when we do the cross comes out and we do the procession. We talk about Christ being crucified in his passion, and we're reading all this on Thursday night, but really we're reading Thursday night for Friday, and that's why it's a little confusing.
Thank you, Brother B, for that question. I did not know the answer to that, so that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have another question from Angelo, who's 5.5, almost 6, and his question is, how come we can't see Jesus, and why is he so strong?
How come we can't see Jesus and why is he so strong? Well, you can see. What do you mean we can't see Jesus? So we can see Jesus in a number of ways, right? So we know that Jesus is in heaven, but we also know that we can see him in many different ways. So one of them is we can see him in icons. So when we see the icons, like we see Jesus over there, there's an icon of Jesus right there. We can see Jesus in the icons, and it reminds us of Jesus, and so we can see what he looks like, and we can pray to the icon. And also, let's not forget that in Holy Communion, when we receive Holy Communion on Sundays, that is actually, we believe that Jesus is actually there in the Holy Communion. And even though we can't see him like a person like looking at us, we believe that he's there. So we can see Jesus in a certain way. It's just physically speaking, like we said, 40 days after his resurrection, he ascended into heaven. And so he is at the right hand of the Father in heaven. And some people sometimes do see him in miracles and visions and things like that. But the most easiest way to see Jesus is to see him in the icons, and also to see him on Sunday when we go take Holy Communion. That's the best kind of answer that I can give you right now.
Okay, so Harris is back. Harris has been in and out.
Uh-huh.
Harris is here. He's 4.5. What's your question, Harris?
My question is, how do you get your powers?
How does Kustuli get his powers?
Yeah, how do you get your powers?
Okay, I was joking with Harris before we started. I said he was bitten by a radioactive spider, but that's not true. That's Spider-Man. How did Jesus get it? So Jesus has power because Jesus is God. Some people get confused because they say, well, I thought God the Father was God. Why is Jesus God? And we believe in the Orthodox Church that God is one, but God has 3 different personalities, 3 different persons. There is God the Father, there is God the Son, who is Jesus, and there's God the Holy Spirit. So Jesus is God. He is God becoming a human being, and so he has all the powers of God. God creates, Jesus can create. God heals, Jesus can heal. God forgives us, Jesus can forgive us. So it's God in human form. It's God becoming a human being. That's what we celebrate at Christmas, when the incarnation. So, yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. Although I do like the bitten by a radioactive bug.
Yeah. I have
the correct answer.
Yeah, I have a question from Calgary.
Yeah, go ahead.
So a question from Calgary says, is it safe to take Holy Communion if I'm celiac? Good question. So I'm going to get in trouble for this one, because people get crazy when we talk about these kind of questions. So celiac disease, for those of you who do not know, is an extreme sensitivity to any type of gluten, right? So it's like a certain type of chemical reaction that happens when somebody ingests gluten, which is found in most breads. So it can make people very, very sick. It can cause problems in their intestines and things like that. So I've had people who have had celiac disease before in my parish here and in Winnipeg, and I've communed all of them with Holy Communion, and they've never gotten sick, not once. Now, they were scared sometimes because they said, I had one girl in Winnipeg who said, even if I have a tiny little crumb of bread, I would get bloated, I would get sick, and I'll be sick for how many days? I'll have to go to the hospital. So she was afraid to take Holy Communion. And I explained to her, I said, listen, Holy Communion, when we talk about Holy Communion, we believe, yes, it's bread and wine, but it's also the body and blood of Christ. Mystically, it is Christ. It is the holiest thing. So it cannot give you disease and it cannot make you sick. And I did commune her, and she never got sick. Now, take that for what it is. I don't know of anybody who's ever gotten sick from it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I believe that the body and blood of Christ will not make you sick. Andídero might get you sick, because andídero is not the body and blood of Christ. It's blessed bread, but it's not the sacrament. And so people with celiac disease usually don't take andídero, don't eat it. But as far as the Holy Communion is concerned, I've never known anybody get sick from it. Again, I'm not an expert as far as like, and I also don't have every single anecdotal evidence, of all over the world of whether people who are suffering from celiac disease have taken communion and have felt sick or not. But it's been my pastoral experience, having communed quite a few celiac patients, that I've never seen an adverse reaction to Holy Communion. So, and mind you, I've never seen an adverse reaction to Holy Communion for any disease in my ministry of 12 years. So that's the best answer that I got. I'm sorry if it's not as, the best one, but it's what I got.
Awesome. We have a question, a follow-up to our earlier question. We talked about why we dye red eggs, but the question from Georgia is, why do we crack them? What's the significance of that?
Oh yeah, the cracking. So the cracking is representative of the tomb, the stone being rolled away from the tomb, right? So the tomb, the soldiers rolled the stone in front of Jesus' tomb, this really big stone, so nobody could get in. And it took a lot of guys to push it. And not only that, but they also sealed the tomb, which sealing the tomb back then was basically, what did they do? It was a way of kind of like, it was kind of like a old school security system. What would they do? They would, place ropes around the doorway, and then they would take hot wax and they would melt wax and they would seal it. They would have like a stamp, like the stamp they put in the back of old letters, and they would seal the ropes together and with a wax seal, and that would dry and harden. And so if anybody tried to tamper with it, or anybody tried to roll away the stone, or try to move it, they'd have to break the seal. Just like, the old days where they used to have the letters and they used to pour wax and stamp them on the back, and that would seal the letter before we had the cool licky, sticky envelopes, right? And then you would have to break the seal to open a letter, and you would know that somebody had read the letter, right? And so in the same way, they would have to break the seal to be able to open the tomb. So they did this on purpose because they were afraid that the followers of Jesus would come at night and steal his body away and then pretend that he had resurrected, but really he hadn't. This is what some of the Jews said at the time, and this is also what some of the Romans believed. So they sealed the tomb, and what happens is that the resurrection, the angel came down and the light shone everywhere, and the stone moved away on its own, and the seals broke, and the soldiers fell down and acted as if they were dead because they were so scared of the vision that they saw. So that breaking of the seals and the moving of the stone is why we commemorate that by cracking the egg, as a tradition, of breaking the stone and opening the tomb for Jesus to come out. Yeah.
Okay, one more question. We've got another one from Badali, which says, why does Jesus call out to God on the cross?
Why does he call out to God? Ooh, this is a really good one. You guys got really good questions.
I know, the questions here are phenomenal, I have to say.
Kids are smart.
The questions are amazing.
Man, parents, take note. Your kids are asking way better questions than you guys did in the last 2 nights. Maybe we should just get the kids to be asking the questions for the rest of the week. Okay, so why does Jesus call out? So I believe what you're referring to is Christ, when he's on the cross before he passes away, he calls out and he says the words in Hebrew, it says, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which translated says, my God, why have you forsaken me? So this is it's not controversial, but it's misunderstood and misinterpreted by a lot of people, even in our own church. Because, okay, so when you hear Jesus on the cross, we say Jesus is God, Jesus is in control, Jesus knows what's going to happen, he knows he's going to die, he knows he's going to resurrect. So if he knows all these things, and if he's the Son of God, and he is God in human form, why would he ever call out to his Father and say, my God, why have you forsaken me? That sounds dumb. It doesn't make any sense. Like, why would Jesus say that? And some people will say, well, it's Jesus' human side. He feels alone, and he feels sad, and he feels that God has abandoned him. But this is not what's going on, actually. What's going on is that Jesus is not just crying out randomly, my God, why have you forsaken me? But rather, he is quoting Psalm 22 in the Old Testament. So, if you don't know the Old Testament, it's really, really hard to understand the New Testament. So, a lot of times people would pray the Psalms. The Psalms of King David were the main prayer life of the Jews, and also even in our faith, in the Orthodox Christian faith, we use Psalms for everything. So Christ started reciting Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? Is the first lines of Psalm 22. If you go back to the Old Testament, you read Psalm 22, you will see what it says. And because it's so beautiful, I'm going to look it up right now and I'm going to read it to you, because I really want you guys to understand why it's not Jesus being afraid. Because that's not what the psalm is saying. I'm just finding it for you right now. Basically, the psalm is not what you think. It just because it starts like that doesn't mean that that's what the meaning is of the psalm. And just look. Sorry. Okay, I found it for you. Okay, so the psalm starts off with those words, but it changes. And let's listen to it because it's so beautiful. And let's listen to what the psalm is actually saying. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me? So far from my cries of anguish. My God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer. By night, but I find no rest. You are enthroned as the Holy One. You are the one Israel praises. In you our ancestors put their trust, and they trusted, and you delivered them. To you they cried out and were saved. In you they trusted and were not put to shame. But I am a worm and not a man, scorned by everyone, despised by the people. All who seek me mock me. They hurl insults and shake their heads. He trusts in the Lord, they say. Let the Lord rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. Yet you brought me out of the womb, and you made me trust in you, even at my mother's breast. From birth I was cast on you. From my mother's womb you have been my God. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help me. Many bulls surround me, strong bulls of Bashan encircle me. Roaring lions that tear their prey open their mouths and wide against me. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart has turned to wax, it has melted within me. My mouth is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You lay me in the dust of death. Dogs surround me, and a pack of villains encircle me. They pierce my hands and my feet. All my bones are displayed. They stare and gloat over me, and they divide my clothes among them and cast lots for my garments. But you, Lord, do not be far from me. You are my strength. Come quickly to help me. Deliver me from the sword, my precious life from the power of the dogs. Rescue me from the mouth of the lions, and save me from the horns of the wild oxen. I will declare your name to my people. In the assembly I will praise you. You who fear the Lord, praise him. All you descendants of Jacob, honor him. Revere him, all you descendants of Israel. For he has not despised or scorned the suffering of the afflicted one. He has not hidden his face from him, but he has listened to his cry for help. For you comes the theme of my praise in the great assembly. Before those who fear you, I will fulfill my vows. The poor will eat and be satisfied. Those who seek the Lord will praise him. May your hearts live forever. All to the ends of the earth will remember and turn to the Lord. And all the families of the nations will bow down before him. For dominion belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations. All the rich of the earth will feast and worship. All who go down to the dust will kneel before him. Those who cannot keep themselves alive, posterity will serve him. Future generations will be told about the Lord. They will proclaim his righteousness, declaring to a people yet unborn that he has done it. So I know that was really long, but it's actually not one of the longest Psalms. But just to kind of like quickly recap, as you can see, Jesus is not afraid that God is going to let him go, is betraying him, or he's abandoning him. He is reciting Psalm 22, and in the Psalm, if you notice, it talks about how God is going to deliver him, how God is going to save him, and it also speaks about what the Messiah, the deliverer, who Christ is, what he's going to go through on the cross. It's a prophecy about himself. It talks about him, they're piercing his hands and his feet. It talks about the soldiers casting lots. They rolled the dice to take his red garment, so they gambled for his clothing. It talks about the Pharisees wagging their heads and making fun of him on the cross. it talks about everything that is happening to him at that moment. So he is reciting Psalm 22, which is prophesizing. It's proving who he is. It's proving that he is the Messiah. It's proving that he is the deliverer. It's proving that he is the Son of God, because it was prophesied by the prophet David in the Old Testament, and Jesus is saying this on the cross right now. It's really, really powerful. And so a lot of people, because they don't know this, or they don't know that this is how they wrote back then in the Gospels, that they would just quote the first lines of the Psalm, and everybody reading it would know that he is actually citing the Psalm. Just like if I said, "Twinkle, twinkle, little star," you all know the song. You know the rest of the words. "How I wonder what you are." All I have to do is say the first line, and you know the rest of the song. Well, all Jesus had to say was the first line, and everybody knew what Psalm 22 said. And so this is, I know it's a long-winded answer, and I know it's for kids, but for your parents listening as well, this is a really, really beautiful time. So when you hear those words of Christ on the cross, go back and read Psalm 22. It's one of the most beautiful Psalms in the Old Testament, and one of the most beautiful Psalms that the prophet and King David wrote. And it really tells you what really is going on the cross at that moment.
Well, and thank you for that. And one thing I think we're both learning is these amazing questions kids have. These are incredible questions. So thank you all, everybody, for the questions. We have one last question, and I think we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, because we're past 2 o'clock.
Of just attention span. So anyone who's been watching can see that I am literally doing what I would do in church, which is managing this behind me. Mm-hmm. But the last question we have relates to Easter, and it says, we talked about red eggs, but do we have to only have red eggs, or are pastel and funky colored eggs okay as well?
Well, we do a lot of different colors now just for fun, but the traditional color is red. So it's not bad or evil or a sin to have other colors, as long as we remember that the most important color for this tradition is the red color. So I would say that as long as you make sure that you dye your red traditional eggs, which is part of our tradition, and it reminds us of the passion of Christ and of St. Mary Magdalene, then you can do other colors as well for fun and things like that. But don't forget the red egg, because if you just the danger is that we say, it's all allowed, we do whatever we want, and then we forget about the red eggs, and then we just have colored eggs, and then we miss the whole reason and the meaning behind the tradition of dyeing eggs. So I would say do your red eggs, and then also you can do other colors as well for fun, but they really have nothing to do with the actual tradition, the holy tradition of dyeing red eggs.
So, and we did answer the red egg question earlier, so if you joined us late, please feel free to go back once this is posted and listen to the beginning if you missed a question.
Yeah.
And also just maybe in closing, Father, just really briefly, because like I said, for attention span's sake, but a lot of kids are probably really anxious right now, maybe even fearful, because the world is seems to be a bit of a scary place. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you would say to them about the church and how it's here and, how things will eventually get back to normal?
Yeah. The church is not a scary, the world is not a scary place. It just, sometimes we think it is, but it's not a scary place. Just because sometimes there's illness and sometimes there's disease doesn't mean we should be scared. You know why? Because whatever happens to us in our lives, whether we're healthy or we're sick, whether we're living or we're passing away, if we have Jesus with us and we believe and we've prepared our souls and we know and we have a good relationship with Jesus and with God, then it doesn't matter. Jesus will be with us in this life and in the next. So whatever happens to us, whether good things happen to us or bad things, Christ will always be with us. And that's the most important thing. That's why Christians should never be afraid of whatever happens to them. And even when our loved ones or maybe older people in our lives pass away and they die and we're sad, they go with Jesus. So we're not afraid for them. They'll be safe. And so don't ever be afraid of anything that's happening in the world. Do your prayers, go to church, make sure you're close to God. Make sure you're close and you have a good relationship with your family and your parents and you love them, and God will love you and he'll take care of you no matter what things happen. So the world is not scary. Don't worry.
I love that answer. I really do. And it's the truth. Okay. Thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you for your questions. Thank you, Fr.TEDTalks. We absolutely adored your questions.
Yeah, you guys are awesome.
Amazing. I think maybe one thing we could do is there's a lot of really good questions, and some are great for our smaller kids and some are great for bigger kids. So maybe Father Ted, something you and I can do is if parents send in their questions in advance, perhaps we could prepare like one of our more traditional Father Ted Talks, not live, for some of our smaller kids and then one for some of our bigger kids. But I know that there are some fantastic questions that you guys have, and I hope that you felt today that there was no stupid question, there was no silly question, that everything is valid and that it'll get answered.
Yeah. And we can do more. We can do more of these as well. Like we don't have to just do, once in a while we can do a kids edition, and there's no reason why we have to stop it. Even after this whole coronavirus thing goes by, we can always continue to do online shows, so, and also a reminder for the parents as well that we will be doing 2 more of these during Holy Week. So we have 1 scheduled. I'm going to post the advertisement on the Facebook group right now after this. I didn't want to do it to confuse everybody until we were done this session. We will have 1 on Monday night at 7:30 p.m. because I have the service at 6, so I'll be done by 7:15. So 7:30, we will have another Father TED Talk live. And also we will have another one on Wednesday, again at 7:30. We will have the Holy Unction service streaming live at 6 p.m. We should be done again around 7:15 because unfortunately, we won't have a lot of people to anoint. And then 7:30, we'll go live again for the Father TED Talk. So we have those 2 scheduled for Holy Week. I don't have anything else scheduled because after that, it gets a little bit hectic with all the services. But we'll see how we go, and then we'll play it by ear in Bright Week. Maybe we'll do another one for the Paschal one afterwards. So.
Follow us on Facebook. Send questions to Fr.TEDTalks@gmail.com. Spread it around. Let people know that we're doing this. And if you are interested in another chat with kids or with adults, let us know. We can always set it up. I'm going to go so I can peel the tape that's been placed on my back by Mr. Harris.
Yeah. Spread the Father TED Talks, not the coronavirus.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Take care, guys. God bless. Kalianasasi.